Okay, we are going to get started. I'm going to hand it over to Rabbi Asher Lopatin, the Executive Director of the JCRC AJC.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Sam Englender and everyone. Thank you all for coming to this very important event where we're going to highlight the dire situation of the Uyghur community in China and learn how we can make a difference. My name is Rabbi Asher Lopatin. I'm the Executive Director of the JCRC AJC, the Jewish Community Relations Council AJC of Detroit. And we are honored, if that's the right word, but we are honored to bring this program to you in co-sponsorship with the Uyghur Human Rights Project and the European Union of Jewish Students. It's also been an honor to work with members of the Uyghur community, such as Rayhan Asat, to help broadcast their voices to the Jewish community and beyond. JCRC of AJC of Detroit is an advocacy and community relations organization, and usually our focus is on local issues. However, as we learned more about the Uyghur crisis, we found ourselves as an organization unable to sit idly by because of our personal history with genocide and repression. For Jews, the Uyghur crisis has become a Jewish crisis. Our first step was to reach out to the broader Jewish community to see who is active in Uyghur advocacy. Many of the panelists later in the program are leading that charge. And we also want to mention specifically the work of the Jewish Movement for Uyghur Freedmen, who were not able to join us at this webinar, but are also at the forefront of this critical work. We also found that many of us are simply unaware of the mass repression and cultural genocide of the Uyghur people, and there is still much work to be done. We hope that each of you will join us in this work and find ways to advocate for the Uyghur people. Please ask any questions you might have through the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We have a very full 1 hour program today, so we cannot promise that every question will be answered, but we hope to respond to some of the audience's questions through the program. So please make use of that Q&A program on the bottom of your screen. I would now like to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Omer Kanat, who will give us some background and educate us on the reality of the situation on the ground in China. Omer Kanat is the Executive Director of the Uyghur Human Rights Project, a human rights research and advocacy organization based in Washington, D.C., and is co-founder and chairman of the Executive Committee of the World Uyghur Congress. Omer has over 2 decades of broadcast journalism experience, working as senior editor at Radio Free Asia and senior editor at Radio Free Europe. He was born in 𝐔𝐲𝐠𝐡 City in East Turkestan and is fluent in 8 languages. Mr. Omer Kanat, please.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Rabbi Asher. Thank you so much. UHRP and the Uyghur community around the world extremely grateful for the generous and firm support of the Jewish community. I would like to speak about the background to the Uyghur genocide and an overview of recent developments. I use the term genocide just as more than 35 genocide and atrocity prevention organizations and experts did in September to describe the situation, as well as yesterday's finding by the Canadian Parliament Subcommittee on Human Rights, who described it the same way. Uyghurs are a Turkic people. Our homeland is East Turkestan, but the Chinese government call it Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. We have a close cultural and linguistic ties with the peoples in Central Asia. Our external ethno-religious identities are a reason why Chinese government sees us as a threat. The East Turkestan is also strategically and economically is very important, and it is very important in China's push for global influence and economic power. The Chinese Communist Party took the control of the East Turkestan in 1949. Policies have long been repressive, but since 2010, it escalated to the point where they meet now criteria of the Genocide Convention. The most shocking element of this genocidal campaign is the network of the concentration camps, which have detained and disappeared huge numbers of the people. Reasonable estimates put it at 1.8 to up to 3 million people. Conditions in the camps are unspeakable. Starvation diet, dehydration, overcrowding, and lack of medical care. Camp survivors have testified to horrific torture, including rape, forced sterilization, death, suicide, and detainees forced to renounce their religion, culture, and take unknown medications. According to a Chinese official in Kashgar, the purpose of the camps is to, quote, break their lineage, break their roots, break their connections, and break their origins. But Uyghurs outside the camps are also subjected to a totalitarian police state and systematic attacks on their religion, culture, and family life. In addition to the massive buildup of security forces in the region, authorities have been developing extensive surveillance technologies targeting the entire population. These includes a system which analyzes people's contacts, behavior, and to determine if they are a threat. State surveillance extends inside Uyghur homes. Over 1 million Chinese officials regularly visit, eat, and sleep with the Uyghur families in the so-called homestay programs. What has happened to the children of the detainees? The government has taken the children away from their grandparents and other relatives into state-run facilities, where they are subjected to a political indoctrination. They are forbidden to speak Uyghur and never see their relatives. The government calls them orphanages, but the Washington Post calls them concentration camps for children. The systematic destruction of Uyghur mosques, shrines, and cemeteries is well documented from satellite imagery, personal testimonies, and official government documents. Such demolitions are reminiscent of attacks on Jewish synagogues and cemeteries and constitute a precursor to a genocide. Forced labor has emerged as one of the most pressing issues connected to the ongoing campaign of repression. Numerous factories exist within the same compounds as the camps. Others are sent to work in factories after their release, while still others are sent directly to the factories thousands of miles from their homes, including in coastal areas. The US government has responded to the threat of the goods made with the forced labor entering the US market. In July, US Customs and Border Protection seized a 13-ton shipment of human hair that originated in the forced labor system. Other official actions include placing sanctions on complicit CCP officials and most significantly on the Xinjiang Production and Construction Corps, or Bingtuan. The Bingtuan is a paramilitary organization with massive corporate holdings within the region and internationally. It is controlled directly from Beijing. Congress has passed overwhelmingly bipartisan legislation. The Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act, and a bill under consideration, the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, hold to account Chinese officials complicit in genocide and prevent the trade in goods made in the Uyghur region. The severity of the Uyghur crisis has meant that the issue is finally making headlines around the world. Civil society organizations are mobilizing to respond to it. Jewish groups and individuals were among the earliest to take an interest in the issue. Jewish World Watch was one of the first genocide prevention organizations raising the alarm about the Uyghur crisis. The European Union of Jewish Students, who helped organize this event, have been conducting advocacy in Europe. The US Holocaust Memorial Museum has held events highlighting the persecution of the Uyghurs and gave me an opportunity to offer reflections on the Holocaust from a Uyghur perspective. A group founded this year, the Jewish Movement of Uyghur Freedom, have started an international campaign to organize Jewish communities around the world to take action. I want to thank you for your attention and support. I now urge you to help us in our work. We need your voice, your donations, and your time. If you want to find out how you can help, please visit what you can do at our website, UHRP.org. Thank you. Now I will introduce the next speaker, Rayhan Asat, Ms. Rayhan Asat. Rayhan Asat is an attorney at the Wall Street law firm in DC office. She is specialized in anti-corruption, internal investigation, and international dispute resolution. She is a frequent speaker on issues concerning corruption on human rights. Rayhan is also president of the American Turkic International Lawyers Association, and she is on the advisory board of the Jewish Movement for Uyghur Freedom. She is campaigning for release of her brother, Akbar Asat, since his disappearance into the Chinese concentration camp system. Please, Rayhan.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a rather emotional day. Behind over 1 million numbers, there are real people and lives. These Uyghur people are not numbers. They are brothers, sisters, mothers, and fathers. I'm here to tell you a devastating story about my brother, a cutting-edge entrepreneur and philanthropist who caught up in the Chinese concentration camps. Some of the best of us, intellectuals, the influential members of our community, are living nightmare in the Chinese concentration camps. Once a glorious land became a strange land in my mind. All it took was one trip to America for him to be targeted. That year was March 2016. You can imagine how long it has been for me as a family of a victim to live this nightmare as well. My brother is a founder of a social media platform catering to the Uyghur community known as Bangladesh. He became so successful, the platform itself became a bridge between the Xinjiang government and ethnic groups. In fact, in October 2015, a few months before he was thrown into the Chinese concentration camps, he organized what titled I Love Xinjiang social media campaign to celebrate the 60 years of Xinjiang since the formation of People's Republic of China. The goal is to unite different ethnic groups. He invited everybody from all walks of life and different ethnic groups, including Han Chinese, to share their celebratory remarks. The campaign created a movement of unity in Xinjiang because citizens representing every ethnic group and all sorts of professions, including a patrol officer, participated. Most importantly, he used the platform for philanthropic initiatives like helping kids with disabilities. He came to the United States in 2016 to participate in an exchange program sponsored by the US Department of State. one from which many world leaders, including Chinese citizens of the majority Han ethnicity, have benefited for decades, including the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern. Within weeks of returning from the United States to Xinjiang, he disappeared into the shadow of the internment camps. At the time, I was graduating from Harvard Law as the first Uyghur student and expecting in 2 months' time for my brother to bring my parents to attend my graduation. On a day that is supposed to be somewhat a milestone, it was a very lonely day for me. The irony is that before his trip to the US, the Chinese government promoted him as a model citizen, positive force, and bridge builder. He was in the good graces of China, but that trip to the US labeled him as an extremist and a mark for the concentration camps. I often am reminded of what Warren Buffett coined, the lottery of births. We can't design how we will be born, a Jewish, Uyghur, American, or Swedish. If we're lucky, by birth, we become a citizen of a democratic country. My brother, along with over 1 million Uyghurs currently in the Chinese concentration camps, they were not that lucky. I often wonder, what if my brother won that lottery of births and he was born into the US or any other democratic country? He could be Steve Jobs or Simon Sinek or Mark Zuckerberg of that country. Unfortunately, my brother won the wrong lottery. I only started my campaign this year. My fight to free my brother was featured in the New York Times. I was frightened despite being an attorney as a result of state-sanctioned terror. It took me 3.5 years to speak out. The pain, damage, and emotional trauma caused by the Chinese government have taken years of my parents' lives. I often read Dr. Edgar and Viktor Frankl's books to give myself much needed encouragement that I need to make a meaning out of his suffering. Words fall short of describing the pain, courage, and longing that I feel about my incredibly kind-hearted and talented brother. This should not be an issue that warrants calls for Christian, Jews, Uyghurs, or Muslim. It should be a human rights issue that all of us need to speak out and carry the promise of never again. I am deeply moved by the Jewish response. And my brother's legal counsel is a few lawyers from the Roel Wallenberg Center for Human Rights, and so many Jewish friends joined the call for my fight to free my brother. So I want to end my speech by saying that 75 years ago, the world pledged never again. I hope many more of you will join and be the voice for voiceless victims like my brother and over 1 million concentration camp victims. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rayhan, for sharing that story. Unfortunately, it is a reality, and I think this webinar is going some way towards highlighting the issue and bringing that to the collective consciousness of people across the Atlantic. I'm briefly going to introduce myself and the organisation that I'm coming at this webinar from, and before engaging again with you both, Rayhan and Omer. My name is 𝐸𝐸𝐻𝑒𝐿𝐻 Selby. I'm the Policy Officer at the European Union of Jewish Students, EUJS. And for those of you watching on Zoom that are perhaps less familiar with EUJS, EUJS is the umbrella organisation of 36 Jewish student unions from across Europe, and is the democratic and peer-led representation of roughly 160,000 Jews in Europe. For the past year, EUJS has been engaged on this issue of the systematic persecution of Uyghurs in China via our campaign entitled Never Again Right Now, based on the premise that as Jews and as a people who have known genocide, we feel that we have a certain responsibility to stand up and be vocal on this issue. And my colleague Bini Gutman will no doubt talk further on this later on. Now, as I mentioned in this section, I want to engage with Omer and Rayhan as part of a short Q&A. I'd encourage those watching on Zoom to use the Q&A function. And if time allows it, I would certainly put your questions towards our panelists to make this section as interactive as possible. Omer, perhaps I can start with you. Coming from a European perspective over the course of the past year or so, I would say that awareness of the persecution of the Uyghur people in China has grown, albeit very gradually. Therefore, I'd be interested in getting your assessment of the trends of Uyghur advocacy over the past year and past months in particular, both in a US and European context. And going deeper, how do you believe that we can accelerate this process so that the topic becomes a truly household issue?
Yes, thank you so much. So we are very happy to see all these trends. You know, this although China has been trying to hide, you know, everything from the international community and put a blanket of, you know, secrecy on what's happening in the region, but the scale of the repression was too large and too big, and now finally international community begin to raise their voices. So we are very happy for that, and we will, you know, ask the international community to, you know, to do more, to take action. So what's happening is a genocide. Yesterday, the Canadian Parliament also recommended the Canadian government to label it as a, you know, genocide. So therefore, the international community has an obligation to stop what the Chinese government is doing to the Uyghur people. So the Uyghur advocacy is also, you know, getting support from the all this, you know, Jewish groups, Christians and Muslims around the world. So it is, we hope that at the end, this advocacy work, this grassroots movements will force the governments in different countries to come together and to take action to stop the Chinese atrocities against the Uyghur people.
Thank you very much, Omer. And absolutely, as you say, this prescription of genocide is very key. And when verified reports and testimonies are coming out of mass sterilization taking place in these concentration camps, then I really don't think it's beyond doubt that a genocide is exactly what is taking place. And thank you for your contribution there, Omer. Now, Rayhan, allow me to come to you. You spoke very passionately about your personal story earlier, and I really hope that everyone watching, you know, takes a responsibility in hearing that story and sharing what they heard, sharing your family's experience in view of generating greater socio-political will on this issue. Rayhan, coming to you personally as a lawyer, I think perhaps you have some unique perspective on this. For instance, you've engaged with student-led movements such as the Jewish Movement for Uyghur Freedom, which has been referred to as a member of their advisory board. You've engaged with civil society, as this webinar attests to, and also there's a greater awareness at a broader institutional level. What would your message be to students, to civil society, and at a governmental level? What do you see as the main and most pertinent entry points, for instance, for each of those groupings in terms of their advocacy and activism?
Yeah, thank you so much. First, like, you know, in terms of governments, I actually wrote an op-ed in Foreign Policy, laying out why this amounts to genocide. And I do hope, like, you know, at a governmental level, like all governments do recognize what's happening to Uyghur people and the mass atrocities amounts to genocide, so that we can actually work together and create it in this concerted effort to end this repression, unprecedented repression that we've seen since World War II. And I'm a big believer that students can really change the fate of millions of Uyghurs, because I do want to see university-wide coalition. I want like student leaders in every university to create some sort of either like, standing in solidarity with Uyghur people, or join the existing students movement, join us. So that's the one thing. And the other thing that I do want people to use their social media platform, because at the end of the day, these kind of dictatorship, totalitarian regimes, they do respond to public opinion. So far, the Chinese government took the silence and complicity from the international community as a green light and continue to build even more prisons, more camps. As the evidence suggested this year, I thought the international outcry created some sense of shame in the Chinese government to stop its repression. But the evidence suggests even today, they continue to build these new camps. So even the luckier ones who are outside of the camps, their lives could be upended at any moment, unless we say, no, not on our watch. So that's what I hope to see. I hope to see like every student, age, title, wealth, or none of that are barriers to bring about change. So it doesn't matter who you are, which religion you come from, which ethnicity you're from. I want all of you to think creatively, use your voice, use your platform, use your university affiliation, and speak out on this issue. We're not asking much. I do hope people would carry my brother's picture or carry the other victims' picture, because sometimes personal stories can tell a very compelling story. But at the end of the day, use your voice. And I think that's the basic things that we can do. Thank you. I hope that satisfies.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rayhan. And that certainly is such a powerful call to action that I think everyone listening thinks is truly, truly needed, and the evidence is overwhelming. And so all that's left for me to say at this moment is thank you to Omer and Rayhan for their interventions and contributions. And it's now my pleasure to pass over to Rabbi Sam Englender, the Community Outreach Manager from the Jewish Community Relations Council, AJC, who will chair the Jewish Roundtable discussion section of this webinar. Over to you, Sam.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Omer and Rayhan and Ilan, for laying that groundwork, and especially to Rayhan for sharing that very painful and stirring personal story. Now we're going to transition to our response as Jews and as citizens, whether we're Jewish or not, of a country where we are able to engage in political advocacy and in free speech. So I will encourage all of the panelists to turn on their video and unmute themselves if they have not already. The first question will be targeted towards everyone, and I will introduce each person in turn. So first, I think it would be useful for all of us to just get a brief history of the work you and your organization are doing on this issue. Ambassador Rabbi Saperstein, you can go first. I'm going to give a brief introduction. For 40 years, Rabbi Saperstein has directed the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism, representing the Reform Jewish movement, the largest segment of American Jewry, to the U.S. Congress and administration, and currently serves as its director emeritus. For over 2 years, Rabbi Saperstein served as the U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, carrying out his responsibilities as the country's chief diplomat on religious freedom issues. Rabbi Saperstein has served as the president of the World Union for Progressive Judaism. He currently serves as an adjunct professor at the Georgetown University School of Foreign Service and Center for Jewish Civilization. Ambassador, thank you for joining us, and I'd love to hear, you can answer the question as you wish, but you're free to do so also referring to the Obama administration.
Well, during the time that I was at the State Department, the crisis of the Uyghur community was a major crisis. I actually tried to get permission during my trip to China to get into both Tibet and to Xinjiang province so we could see firsthand, and they, as they generally deny access to those regions by foreign diplomats. But, you know, the documentation was clear even back then. I mean, we were documenting things at the State Department from the protests over the 2009 treatment of the Uyghur guest workers in Guangdong province. There's been long restrictions, and year by year, those restrictions within Xinjiang province became worse and worse and more noticeable. Interference with Ramadan, forcing people to cut off beards, making it more difficult to do studies for their kids. So we were following the deepening crisis, which of course in the last few years has become quite significant. You know, just a final word on the State Department. I'm glad to see this past summer they finally used the Global Magnitsky Act to actually act on this. In terms of the Reform Jewish movement, I have remained in my work there, involved in speaking out on these issues, monitoring these issues, working with people on Capitol Hill, try and deal with some legislation issues that would be helpful, and continue to speak out, educating the Jewish community and speaking out to the broader public on this. We will continue to do so. This remains a priority for us, and I'm really pleased to be with others from the Jewish community and the Uyghur communities who are so forceful on this issue and are making a difference in the struggle.
Thank you, Rabbi. Yeah, I too find it so heartening to be surrounded by strong Jewish voices who are very active on this and realize that this is our issue too. Transitioning, I want to introduce to everyone to Bini Gutman. Bini Gutman is the current president of the European Union of Jewish Students, having been in this post for over a year. Originally from Vienna, Austria, in his role as 𝐂𝐲𝐠𝐻 president, Bini represents over 160,000 young Jews in Europe through a number of means, including political advocacy. One of 𝐂𝐲𝐠's major political advocacy campaigns is Never Again, Right Now, ending the Uyghur genocide. Bini, thanks for being here. Can you tell us a little bit about Never Again, Right Now and your work in it?
Thank you so much, Sam, and thank you everyone for joining. So as Sam has said, we are the democratic and peer-led voice of young Jews across Europe. And in our advocacy work, in our political work, we have a core value that 𝐂𝐲𝐠 really tries to represent in its political work, no matter what we are doing. And that is that Jewish rights are human rights and human rights are Jewish rights. And we believe that in order to advocate for Jewish rights, you always need to advocate for human rights and vice versa. Both because it's the right thing to do, and also because very often we are stronger if we build strong coalitions. I personally started to become active and aware about the issue of the Uyghur genocide after reading the testimony of 𝐔𝐲𝐠𝐡𝐮𝐫𝐬 in ♯ last October. And then shortly afterwards, we at 𝐂𝐲𝐠, together with the German Union of Jewish Students, who runs the Never Again Right Now campaign together with us, started working on that campaign. And then in late January, shortly after January 27, shortly after thousands of people around the world said never again, we actually decided to start to launch this campaign, saying that never again is not just a memory of the past, but also a lesson for today, and that we have to say never again right now. And I think maybe together with 𝐷𝐞𝐬𝐬𝐬, we were one of the first Jewish organizations in Europe to become active on the issue. And as a student organization, we really tried to base our campaign on 3 elements over the past year. And the first of all, and especially in the beginning, most importantly, we tried informing people because as of right now, still, and this is slowly changing, thankfully, but still many people out there don't even know what is going on, don't even know what the Uyghur genocide is. So if you take one thing home from this webinar, go out and educate your friends, educate your peers, make sure that people are aware of what is happening. I think that's crucially important. And we started this campaign by trying to raise attention primarily via social media campaign and a number of op-eds in major European newspapers. And we also started running a number of informational sessions. We even started to run webinars before the coronavirus lockdown and before everyone started transitioning into lockdowns. So before it became cool, we had the webinar on the Uyghur issue with Uyghur representatives, and we also produced by students for students 2 documentaries on the Uyghur issue and with Uyghur activists from Europe. At the same time, at 𝐂𝐲𝐠, we also try to engage in high-level advocacy to promote political change on the issue. We work with the European Parliament quite actively, and among other things, and we've organized a roundtable with a number of members of the European Parliament, and launched a pledge with 10 demands together with the World Uyghur Congress, with 10 demands that we are having for the European Parliament to enact change. And some of these things are things that are already realized in America, like passing a Magnitsky Act in the European Parliament finally, and then imposing sanctions on individuals that are part of the Uyghur genocide. But also it goes also beyond that, and it talks about issues like assigning a special rapporteur to actually have someone from the European Parliament to actually see what is happening there, but goes even beyond that, and goes into sanctioning companies that are profiting from slave labor. And a lot of very well-known Western companies like Volkswagen, like H&M, like Nike are profiting from Uyghur slave labor. And we think that shouldn't be allowed in Europe and around the world. That
yeah, thank you, Bini. Just to give people a little bit of background, 80%, it's been estimated that 80% of all of the cotton that comes from China is produced from Uyghur forced labor. So that's a very important thing to know just in terms of one's own education. And thank you, Bini. I was especially struck by kind of the context of what it means to advocate as a Jewish organization in Europe in the wake of the Holocaust. And we're gonna come back to that in a little bit. Thank you so much. Now, Mia, if you can tell us a little bit about your work. Mia Hasenson-Gross is the director of Rene Cassin, a British human rights organization that is based within the Jewish community. She's worked for Amnesty International as international and was formerly the managing director of the Hanan Ainor Foundation for the Ethiopian Immigration Students in Jerusalem, as well as chairperson of Amnesty International's Israel section. Mia is now a fellow of the Dangur Senior Leadership Program and is a graduate fellow of the Minerva Center for Human Rights at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Thank you so much, Mia, for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit of the history about how you and Rene Cassin got involved in this issue and what you're doing now?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. So I'm the director of Rene Cassin, the Jewish Voice for Human Rights. We're a UK-based charity that works to promote and protect universal rights, drawing on Jewish values and Jewish experience. We believe that as survivors of intolerance, slavery, persecution, and ultimately genocide, and as speakers by experience who understand the need for empathy and solidarity, the Jewish community has a uniquely authoritative voice, but with it also a moral responsibility to speak out against discrimination, against persecution of individuals and groups. As a people, we have both the moral authority and responsibility to act. We started working, Rene Cassin started working on the Uyghurs over the Uyghur issue in May 2019, when I met Rahima Mahmoud, a UK-based Uyghur musician and activist. I heard her story about how she hasn't been in touch with her family for years, didn't know what was happening to her family, and the stories that were emerging about the experience of Uyghurs in concentration camps. And I sat there listening to her story and I was like, but I've heard this story before. This is the story of my family. This is the story of my people. And as a human rights activist for the better part of 25 years, my whole philosophy in life was that I'm doing what I'm doing so that this doesn't happen again. So why does it? So it made complete sense for Rene Cassin as an organization that's named after the drafter of the Universal Declaration for Human Rights and his legacy to take this campaign on. And at that point, it was just launching a campaign. It had several parts to it. The first part was making sure that different stakeholders in the UK Jewish community were informed, but also lended their voice and support. If it's communal leadership, like the Board of Deputies of British Jewry, or spiritual leadership and getting rabbis and community leaders to either write a letter, or they're going to work with Rene Cassin to host a human rights Shabbat that's dedicated to the Uyghur issue. And it was working with it's working with future leadership, our youth movements, our students in partnership with the 𝐔𝐲𝐠𝐻 as well, and Moishe House. And it was also working with Jewish media and launching a joint campaign with one of the leading Jewish newspapers here in the UK, the Jewish News. It was hosting solidarity events with Uyghurs. We actually hosted a virtual solidarity iftar earlier this year. It's creating actions. So there are templates that we provide our supporters. Write to your MP with a series of requests challenging the UK government to hold China accountable for crimes against humanity and genocide. There's a weekly Jewish demonstration outside the Chinese embassy that we support. And what we mainly do is we just facilitate ideas, people, and initiatives. UJS, the Union of Jewish Students here in the UK, hosted a panel for young activists, and we made sure that, or we facilitated the introduction of young Uyghur activists based here in the UK, who may not have been born in China, but are part of a culture and of a people and of a group that is experiencing what we heard from Rayhan and Omer. I'm also a member of the World Uyghur Congress's Advisory Council for their London office, and together we facilitated an interfaith letter of close to 90 cross-faith leaders, including 28 rabbis, and we're launching the Stop Uyghur Genocide campaign with specific calls to action around boycotting it related to the cotton industry that you mentioned, so challenging 89 high street brands, a new campaign that will be launched soon challenging the International Olympics Committee, as China is supposed to host the 2022 Winter Olympics, and raising enough action around that.
Yeah,
and I'll just
actually, one of the questions we just had was exactly about that 2022 Olympics and kind of what movement is going, if there's any movement in terms of boycotting and other thing, and that's something that we'll hopefully have time to get back to. I also wanted to talk to you a little bit later, hopefully, about the involvement of the Jewish community specifically in Britain, because I've heard, I read an article recently that the Jewish community has really taken the lead there. And so, I'll ask you in a little bit about why specifically the Jewish community. But first, I want to transition to Serena. Serena Oberstein is the executive director of Jewish World Watch, an anti-genocide organization based in Southern California. She has an extensive background in public service and the Jewish communal sector, including as regional director of Bend the Arc and the founding Southwest regional director of J Street. Serena served her community as a policy analyst and special assistant in the that's Los Angeles for all you Europeans and internationals, Los Angeles Mayor's office, where she helped shape social policy focused on education and equity. From 2014 and 2018, Serena served as the Los Angeles City Ethics Commission, served on the Los Angeles City Ethics Commission as president and vice president, although I hope not at the same time. Serena, thank you so much for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit about your work and how you got involved?
Sure, thanks so much, Sam. Well, as you mentioned, I'm the ED of Jewish World Watch, which was founded in 2004 by Rabbi Harold Schulweis and Janice Kamner-Resnick as a response to the genocide occurring in Darfur. As much of the world stood by and did nothing on the premise that, Rayhan touched on, which is that silence, we believe that silence is complicity. And we grew into a robust education and advocacy organization, partnering with people on the ground to mitigate the consequences of genocide and work to rebuild and create sustainable communities. Now, 16 years later, unfortunately, mass atrocity and genocide has grown, and so have our efforts. And we, about a year and a half ago, we started working with members of the Uyghur diaspora and UHRP to focus and draw attention to the cultural genocide happening to the Uyghur Muslims in the Xinjiang region. Much of our work focused on advocacy and building a groundswell of support with UHRP, and we have a tremendous diaspora here in Los Angeles as well. We met with congressional representatives advocating for the Uyghur Human Rights Act, which as Omer mentioned, it imposes sanctions on foreign individuals and entities to Congress. It passed Congress, it passed the Senate, and was signed into law in June of this year. Simultaneously, we've been advocating for the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. Sam, you mentioned that 80% of China's cotton is from the Xinjiang region. And what that means in world terms is that 1/5 of the world's cotton is actually from that region. So a tremendous amount of the things that we're using from Amazon and H&M and Costco are coming from that region. And so we really think that it's necessary to figure out how to find an alternative to utilizing that. So right now we're working to continue that groundswell. We're growing our advocacy teams to become even more robust, and hoping to work with more partners to escalate our efforts.
Thank you, Serena. I'm curious, there's so much that's going on in our world domestically, and with the coronavirus, every country is struggling, and specifically in the United States, there's been the election is coming up. There's, right, in terms of race relations, there's a whole bunch of things. So why would you say it's important to focus on issues like this that are happening so at least geographically far away from us?
Yeah, I think everybody has touched on it, and especially when we hear stories like Omer's and Rayhan's, it's impossible to ignore that this is a gross human rights crisis. And at Jewish World Watch, we know that it's our obligation to raise our voices when we're witness to injustice and human rights violations. We can point to our modern day history of the Holocaust and the pogroms, which make us understand really viscerally what lengths governments determined to erase a people will go to. But we can also look to our tradition, which tells us at least 36 times in the Torah that we have to welcome the stranger because we were once strangers in a strange land. And we just celebrated the holiday of Sukkot, which demands that we build a temporary dwelling outside of the parameters of our own home to examine human fragility, to bring in ushpizin or guests, and to share with them, to learn with them, to study with them, and to grow with them. In a moment in our history when it is so easy to feel inundated about everything that's immediately in front of us, including pandemics and, in whatever country we're in, scary governments. When anti-Semitism feels like it's more rampant than ever, I think we would assert that it's more important for us to step outside of ourselves, to be ambassadors and conveners, and to demand that the world come together and raise our voices, especially as Jews.
Thanks. Yeah, I definitely hear you. And my own personal family history, two of my grandparents were Holocaust survivors. And this really hits home. And were it not for, there was a very small minority of folks who helped them at great risk to themselves. And I constantly ask myself, here I am living in a country where there's free speech, where there's no real implications if I speak out on this issue. And so I feel personally that it's my responsibility to do so. I want to transition back to Ambassador Saperstein, and also I'll say to the panelists that now I want to open it up a little bit. So if anyone has questions for your fellow panelists or has a point to respond, please don't hesitate. So I'll originally address at Rabbi Saperstein. I'm curious, what do you see as the paths towards success in getting the American Jewish establishment involved? And zooming out a bit, what do you see as the best way of getting the international community involved moving forward?
indulge me just for a minute to add to what Serena said so eloquently, and they do such wonderful work at Jewish World Watch. Here, in your comment actually evokes this. There are also enormous resonance with the Holocaust. Here, the drone video of the men who were awaiting to be loaded on the trains here and shipped off to the re-education camp. The reports of the 13 tons of human hair that have been collected from internees that was being sold. Here, the forced sterilizations that have taken place, the conscientious effort that's actually had some impact. If you compare, let's say, 2011 to 2015, the birth rate of people, and compare it to the last few years, it is substantially lower now because of the policies that have happened, because many of the men have been interned. So this is there's all this resonance, the separation of children sent off to the government indoctrination schools from their parents. All this is resonance for us as Jews, and we who condemn the conscience of the world for remaining silent in the face of our tragedies cannot remain silent in the face of a tragedy like this as well. It is a real challenge mobilizing the community for the reasons that were alluded to a moment ago, how overwhelmed people are. And it's not just, I mean, just literally, even on the China issue, there are Jews who are involved in the Tibet issue. In Myanmar, the Jews who are involved in the ethnic cleansing of 1 million Muslims who are ethnically cleansed. The Rohingya Muslims are languishing now in Bangladesh. Here, and in all of the other global challenges that we face here in the surreal political scene in the United States and in Israel. Hard to know which is more surreal these days. And the urgency of the economic crisis in the lives of people, and our agencies trying to do as much as we can to support people in need. We have all of these strategies. So there, you know, it is a real challenge to get people focused on this particular issue. But it won't happen unless people approach organizations and ask them to do it, and make it easy for them to sign on to things. If they're busy, very often you're giving someone you produced Mia and Serena, and obviously the Uyghur Human Rights Project produces phenomenal material here. Actually giving someone an action alert that they can do. A draft letter that they can actually use without having to say it didn't come from them. Just give them permission to use something that you've done. Make it easy for people to participate in the Zoom life. It's easier for people, rather than going to a press conference, to participate if you ask them to do it here. And we have to work together to figure out what are the approaches that we can do to actually make people, facilitate people doing what I believe they want to do, and just are overwhelmed and distracted and just don't have time to be able to do. That to me is a pathway that can make a difference. And of course, once someone does it, then they become co-opted on the issue. Then they're far more likely to do it in the future as well. So working together, I think we really can make a difference.
Thank you, thank you. And yeah, you know, that the idea of kind of getting past those barriers. I want to move back to Bini and Mia for our final question, and then I'll just briefly summarize some of the very practical action steps that anyone on this call can take. So for the final question, Bini and Mia, you know, I'm curious, what are some of the barriers that you have faced in your work, whether Rabbi Saperstein mentioned just people are overwhelmed, if there's any other ones, and if you feel that your European context has been different than an American context because of various political relationships with China. So Bini, maybe just briefly, I'll hand it over to you first.
Yes, absolutely. So as I said before, I really think that the main barrier that we have faced and that we are still facing in Europe, and I can't speak For the US, of course, and Mia can also speak much better for the UK, but really the main issue that we are facing in Europe is still that most people just don't know about the issue. Most people just have no idea of what is going on. And this is really what we are struggling with. And this is really what we are trying to change, because as long as people don't know what is happening, people won't get active. And then, of course, it is very hard to be active as a government if China is the counterpart. I mean, in general, the world does not have a good track record in preventing genocide after the Shoah. But what makes it even harder in this case is that the opposition is the Chinese government. And the Chinese government is this huge economic powerhouse that, of course, has huge political influence in Europe as well. But I do think that still can't be an excuse for us to be quiet. And we have, of course, really tried to play with this reference. And I think that this is something that we can do as a Jewish organization, calling our campaign Never Again Right Now. And I think it's important to say that what is happening to the Uyghurs is not the Shoah, and nothing can ever be compared to the Shoah. But what is happening to the Uyghurs is a genocide. And if people, and that is very strong in Europe, and especially in a country like Austria, where I'm from, or in Germany, but really across Europe, and where people are always saying, never again, we must draw lessons from the past, then we need to hold them to account. Then we need to tell them, if you say never again, and if you're serious about saying never again, then that means that you have to fight anti-Semitism, which is what we're doing, but that also means that you have to stand up against genocide, that you cannot let genocide happen. And it doesn't need to be the threshold to Shoah, because otherwise those become empty words if the threshold is the Shoah always. And that is, I think, really the message we are trying to bring through. And that is why I think that we as Jewish organizations and as Jews have a special platform on which we can campaign for the Uyghurs. And then we have seen that. We have seen that it works, because it has really been Jewish organizations across Europe, I think, who have brought the issue to greater attention, because we have the platform. So I really hope that each and everyone who is here today starts using their own platform, whether they are part of a Jewish organization or just individuals, and does something, gets active, because I really think that we need to act, because never again is right now.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I definitely second that. Mia, just briefly, has that been your experience also, that there's just been not enough people who yet are educated on this issue, or does the ground look a little different in England?
There are several, I think, points in the UK. First of all, I didn't think I would use the word in this format or in this platform, but we do have Brexit. So politically, the UK is quite dependent now on countries like China in its trade negotiations. So I think that has an implicit as well as an explicit effect. There is also the current challenge that the UK Jewish community is facing of increased hate crime and anti-Semitism. And I'll say, to the credit of the community, that you would expect it to become very introvert, but it actually isn't. But it is having to balance that challenge as well. But that's also the advantage. We are a very small community. So having an organization like 𝑅𝑒ℎ 𝐽𝑒𝑤𝑖𝑠ℎ, a faith-based campaigning organization, this is what we're for. So we have taken upon ourselves to reach out to different stakeholder groups in the community and to inform and expose and provide opportunities for the communities to act. And also, the ideas of allyship and solidarity are not new to the Jewish community in the UK, and I would say probably not new or unfamiliar to Jews as a whole. So we have experience in the UK of mobilizing the community when it's standing in solidarity with other minority groups, if it's Gypsy Romas or victims of exploitation. So we've developed this mechanism that works really well here in the Jewish community in the UK, where as long as the issue we bring and we inform the community on is both contemporary, but also it relates to us, to our history, to our experience, then there's things we can do. I'd like to say, Raphael Lemkin, the Jewish lawyer who coined the phrase genocide, he referred equally to the cultural destruction of a people as to the physical destruction. Eventually, only the latter made it into the 1948 UN Convention on Genocide. But we know, because of our experience of the cultural destruction that led eventually to the physical destruction, why we need to act. And I think that's very much at the heart of why, as a people that experience also the cultural, the religious, our entire folklore and basis of our peoplehood that was threatened and attempted to destruct.
Right. And those two often, unfortunately, are intertwined. And, you know, I just want to say that I've been heartened to hear how the British Jewish community, how involved it's gotten, largely, you know, thanks to your organization. And I really see that as a model for other countries. I just want to make sure that everyone comes away with this program with a sense of how they can act. So it would be remiss if I didn't mention 3 different opportunities. The first is for the Americans among us. Please contact your senators to support the Uyghur Forced Labor Act. This is one of the very few bipartisan things in America at this moment. This is a bipartisan act. This is not Republican, this is not Democrat, this is human rights. It was already passed the House overwhelmingly. It just needs attention. That's the only thing stopping it. For anyone throughout the world, you can please get any local organization, faith-based or otherwise, to sign on to the End Uyghur Forced Labor Coalition. This is a coalition that, similarly to the Uyghur Forced Labor Act, is looking to stop the use of goods that have been produced by forced labor in other countries. I mean, in China, but to other countries. And the third is there's just opportunities for direct support. If you're the type of person who says, you know what, I want to help someone, individual, such as there's 𝐤𝐻𝑒 who is a refugee of the camps, one of the very few to escape the camps because China tries to keep these people in the country. It's one of the few examples of, they're not trying to get rid of the Uyghurs, they're trying to keep them in and destroy them culturally and religiously. And so she has been a victim of torture, of horrible circumstances. She really needs your help. So there's an opportunity for direct support for 𝐤𝐻𝑒, and all of these are being put in the chat box and will be sent afterwards by email as a follow-up. So I just really want to thank truly everyone who has been involved in this program. It's such an honor to work with both the Uyghur voices who are, you know, we're looking to see how we should act, because you are the ones who are directly, you know, affected by this. And it's we're so honored to be a part of your struggle. And I also want to thank all of the Jewish participants who have really taken this on and who have inspired me and our organization to act. So thank you all. Thank you, the attendees, for being here. And we hope that you get involved and act on this. Be well.
Thank you so much, everybody.
So much, Sam. Thank you.
Thank you.